What's up, everybody? I'm Nick Irwin. This is episode 116 of Beyond the Ballot, and today I'm joined by my friend Andrew Cosgrove. As you'll hear, Andrew was on the show almost exactly a year ago after some more civil unrest that was going on in Virginia for the pro-Second Amendment rally, that whole thing going on, and now he's back after all the unrest at the Capitol and multiple capitals around to kind of go over everything that's been happening in the world with these events. So if you've been living under a rock, you don't know what's going on. I'm going to assume you know what's going on with the quote-unquote storming of the Capitol building in D.C. and all that. So that's what we're going to talk about. But more importantly, the real takeaways from that, not necessarily everything about what happened, but what we as people who truly want freedom and reject authoritarianism should be looking at and should worry about. It's okay to talk about this stuff if you're an anarchist or a libertarian because it affects you one way or the other. So we're going to jump into that. I hope you enjoy it. It was a lot of really good ideas and discussion going back and forth, and I think it's important stuff to think about. I'd like to know what you think about what the fallout is that from whatever happens is going to be, how you should prep accordingly, because that's always one of the most important things, is being prepared for any terrible eventuality. So make sure to drop that in the comments. Find at Beyond Ballot Pod or at Non-Voting Nick on any social media and let me know what's up, what you think's going to come out from all this. So before we jump in, I got to thank my Beyond the Ballot super supporters, Maxwell, Dave, Dennis, and Chuck. Couldn't do it without you. The show is also not only produced by myself, but also by Dave, Dennis, and Chuck. I really appreciate you guys. If you all want to support the show as a super supporter or even a producer of the show, you can do that at patreon.com/beyondtheballot. I really appreciate it. All right, before we jump in, open for new sponsorships. I really appreciate everything that Greg Papanikolas and Project Sparta did for us all the way through 2020. You made it such a wonderful show, and I hope we helped each other a lot, but the contract is up. So if you have a hustle, a business, anything like that, and you want to sponsor the show, a shout out for an episode, anything like that, go ahead and email me at podcast@gobeyondtheballot.com, and we'll get you hooked up. We'll maybe get your products and services out there to some people. So without further ado, enjoy the show. Shout out to Voluntary Apothecary. Voluntary Apothecary is here to fulfill all of your beard care needs. They carry beard oil, mustache wax, beard butter, and more. I only use their beard care products, and I love them. You can check out their amazing products at voluntарyapothecary.com, and listeners of the show can take 10% off your order with code BEYOND at checkout.
Professional anarchists.
You guys are getting paid?
All right, back again for another Beyond the Ballot, and I'm joined with the homie Andrew Cosgrove. And right before we started recording here, you mentioned it's been almost a year to the day since we recorded a full episode together, and last time was the Richmond protest, the Second Amendment protest, right?
Yep. Yeah, and at the Capitol of Richmond, that was right before they passed red flag laws in Virginia, and they also passed one handgun a month at the same time.
Yes. Yeah, and so you mentioned since then there's been some interesting dynamics. Like it's been a year, and we had no idea about coronavirus coming in, and fucking things have gotten wild, but it's kind of revolving back to not only state capitals again, but in D.C. and what happened on the 6th. But sorry, I cut you off there. What were you going to say?
Yeah, just, along the same lines of the dynamic of last time we talked, there was no coronavirus, wasn't even a thing in our minds yet. We'd heard some news reports about in China or whatever, but it wasn't even a thing Here, we weren't concerned about it. We were concerned about what was going down in states like here in Virginia, what we were dealing with, and a couple other states were having some events too. And so, like you said, it's kind of circled back around almost at the exact same time of year.
Mm-hmm.
Except now it's on top of all the lockdowns and other draconian measures that are going on.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. So, yeah, I guess pretty much what we'll be talking about today is that stuff, I don't even know what to call it because people are calling it so many different things, but the riots or breaking into the Capitol building, all that stuff, fallout for people who are liberty-minded, anarchists, libertarians, anybody who doesn't want, the centralized government more or less. I think we have a different set of issues to worry about than what most people are worrying about. And even people within that realm of anarchists and libertarians, it seems like everybody's worrying about the wrong things. Like the whole private businesses is getting thrown around again, this time by more left-leaning people who want to see Trump and, Parler and all that silenced. And I think it's just, as always, there's so much more fucking nuance to the discussion that's never brought up in posts on Facebook.
Yeah, it kind of gets ignored how complicated it actually is. It gets simplified down to stuff like, is Facebook a private business or not, and therefore is it okay to silence people or silence a president?
Mm-hmm.
And that none of that stuff takes the big picture into account, I'd say. I guess that's how I'd word it.
Sure.
Because I think realistically, like you said, we probably have bigger things to worry about, as in the stuff that's happening that, like, on the 6th, does that do anything for anyone? Does that prevent tyranny in any way? Or is it going to make it worse for us? And I think what happens is, and a lot of people kind of called this, that what happened there is just going to make it worse for us in terms of they're just going to implement stricter gun laws, which they were probably going to do anyway, but now they have a reasoning for it.
Sure.
They have a driving force behind it saying, look at this, look at these crazy people and what they did. And so basically they have their spear point now.
Mm-hmm.
And I think the oversimplification, I'd say what they do is, after an event like that, then they silence someone like Donald Trump, and that becomes the narrative to
right.
everyone, to the public, to them. And it takes away from the big shit that's certainly going to happen and affect us more than that ever could.
Yeah. Oh, they're already using it within 24 hours of the supposed storming the Capitol. And if you've been living under a rock, people broke into the Capitol building in D.C. where they were meeting to finalize the electoral votes in favor of Biden, and supposedly stormed it, broke windows, and got in. And anyways, we'll get back to that. But they're absolutely capitalizing on that. They never let a good situation go to waste. And there's within 24 hours since that happened, they now have, I think it's a 20,000 page domestic terrorism bill ready to go through the House and the Senate and all that.
Yeah, I just saw a post about that. 20,000 pages. That's what I saw as well. Similar to, basically, it's actually true. It took them 9 months to figure out whether to give people $600 or not. Mm-hmm. And that was what, a 6,000 page bill, I think. They certainly didn't read all of that. They can't. It was either 5,000 or 6,000, something like that. Yeah. So we're talking about quadruple that, essentially. So we're not going to have any idea what is in that until months, years afterwards. That's how they do this stuff. They put 20,000 pages worth of shit in there, and then it all gets passed as a blanket, and then we deal with the consequences later without even knowing what we're dealing with.
Right. Yeah, new things just start coming out, like with the last one, like the whole copyrighted materials thing that could make a lot of memes be punishable by, what is it, a $30,000 fine and time in federal prison. Same with streaming services, streaming copyrighted materials. And it's confusing, but the thing that I see happening with that one, the streaming materials one, is like services like Twitch, where people stream games and stuff like that, are going to get cut off at the knees, if I'm understanding it correctly, because there's people streaming copyrighted materials for profit. They're playing games and whatnot. So I don't know if that'll be left up to Twitch to allow them to do that, to work with the people who own those materials and whatnot. But I don't know. That, like you said, there's a ton of fat in that one. There's a whole page about the Smokey the Bear imagery. Like, people can't use Smokey the Bear imagery anymore unless you own it, which is the government that owns it, the Forest Service. So yeah, who knows what's in a 20,000 page domestic terrorism bill. It's just exactly what all of us in our little social media sphere have been saying. It's setting up for Patriot Act 2.0, and that has to be what this is. I'm excited to see what kind of fucking name they tack onto it that's similar to Patriot Act. That should be interesting. But so let's. Oh
yeah, because it's always. Go ahead.
I was going to say, let's finish that thought, and then let's jump into what happened at the Capitol and takeaways from that.
Well, I was just going to say, they always have to attach some kind of name to it that makes it sound good to normies, basically. Because to normies who aren't going to actually figure anything out about it, Patriot Act, that sounds good. Mm-hmm. It's patriotism, right? Yeah. It's like they have to throw something like that in there.
Yeah, exactly. Like the CARES Act from the first round of stimulus and whatnot. So, but yeah, so on January 6th, a few days ago, there was a group of people who were able to make their way into the Capitol building in Washington, D.C., broke windows. There's a lady who was trampled, a lady who was shot in the neck. I think someone died of a heart attack. I think there was 4 deaths. And there's a lot of controversy around that because people are saying, they're right-wing extremists, and they were decked out with Trump flags. And then you had Buffalo Horn guy with his furs and his face painted like an American flag and shit. You had the guy with the Trump beanie walking away with Nancy Pelosi's podium. And yeah, it was a big nothing. Like I was watching it happen, through
someone.
Yeah, go ahead.
Someone stole all of AOC's shoes too.
Nice.
Yeah.
So yeah, those are the things I like coming out of it. That stuff's awesome. The guy sitting with his feet up on Pelosi's desk, and you can see like the emails were still up and all that. So what the media is painting it as, of course, is a bunch of QAnon idiots and Trump supporters, busting in and causing all these problems, and all the reps and had to get out and go into hiding in a bunker, and the interns who were carrying the boxes with the electoral votes are being praised as heroes, even though they're marched out with tons of men with guns, protecting them nowhere near anything that was going down. And so that's what it looks like on the surface. And since then, and on that day, there were videos coming out of cops, Capitol Police, literally opening the gates and waving people in to the building, to the grounds. And then the people making their way in an orderly kind of group, not a single file line, couple people deep, through the velvet roped barriers. And then just the videos from inside, people are just kind of like walking around. There's cops kind of intermingling or backing up and closing themselves into other places. And since then, of course, the Trump supporting right has said, it was Antifa. They just had super secret ways of, mingling in and looking like Trump supporters. And so, yeah, that's pretty much what was going on. Some people made it up to the dais, including Buffalo Horn guy, and got some pictures up there. And it was just a big selfie fest. And a lot of those people are getting arrested now. They're getting tracked down and arrested. So that's really not the important part of what happened. The important part is, like we said, the results with that domestic terrorism bill now being passed. Trump egging people on to go to the Capitol when it was happening on Twitter, and now being banned from Twitter, Facebook, all of Facebook's companies that they own, probably TikTok. I saw a whole list of them. There's like 8 or 9 places where Trump is banned from, and they've taken down a whole other bunch of stuff with them. And then Parler, the app, is getting pulled from the Amazon servers because that's how they run their app, is through the Amazon servers. And there's a whole lot around it. And the thing that, it's so deep, because all of this started and all of this happened because of the constant, Trump saying that the election was stolen from him and that there was cheating involved. And that's a whole nother can of worms that we have to get into as well, because now there's videos coming out of the lawyer of the dude from Italy who supposedly was given the Dominion data machine voting information, all the ballots, pretty much the electronic ballots, and directed by I think they said U.S. Army and intelligence. I'm not sure if it was like people or groups or agencies or whatever, to mess with it, send it through their servers, and then send it back. And there's been blackouts at the Vatican and Italy and stuff since then. That lawyer dude released a video. So, and who knows if any of that's true. And that's the fucking problem here that we come down to with all of this, with people being silenced, with a bunch of info that we're not getting that's supposedly out there in the rest of the world. There's all kinds of reports happening about this. We're not seeing any of it here. And the problem with all of this censorship one way or another, tomfoolery from the government not letting this stuff out by having these tech companies delete the videos and the tweets and whatnot as they're being put out. We're not seeing any of it. And I think that's the main problem. We don't know what the fuck's going on.
Yeah. So one of, kind of in order of events, the election itself, which, it's worth talking about, but it's also worth pointing out that while this stuff affects us, and that's why we talk about it, it's still kind of an oversimplification too of the big picture. We don't want to be guilty of what we just talked about a few minutes ago, but to build the full picture and kind of in order of events, that's essentially when this really started to go downhill in terms of the last 6 months. So what you mentioned about like videos getting deleted and stuff, the thing with the election fraud, when all of that was going around, one of the things that irritated me the most was there were, I don't know how many I saw, hundreds maybe, different videos of people videotaping themselves or getting caught on camera messing with ballots. And they were all over the internet. And it was just, first of all, they were scrubbed. I'm almost sure of that because I haven't seen them again. And when I would see one, I would see it and never see it again. So that's how this all kind of started for me in terms of being pretty confident that there was tomfoolery. But I think what people need to come to realize is this has happened in basically every election. I mean, I don't know, forever, possibly. What the difference is now is the internet and social media is it's so easy to get coverage of everything, at least right when it happens, because they can't censor it right literally at the moment it's happening.
Right.
And so it seems more prevalent than it is. I'm not saying it's not prevalent, but this always happens. There's always fraud. There's always corruption. We're just seeing it more than we ever have, except a few weeks later when it all disappears.
Right. Yeah, that's one of the biggest takeaways that we need to remember from this, is that always happens. And if you think back to Trump versus Hillary when Trump first got elected, it didn't seem like there was as much out there, even though we were in the age of, cell phone cameras and all that stuff. And then if you go back to the, Bush George W. Bush election versus Gore with the hanging chads and whatnot, they were still using mainly paper and those punch-style voting machines, and that's where the hanging chad shit came from. And that was fuckery as well. So you're right. We're seeing more of it. I think with the rise of the electronic ballots and casting your votes that way and processing the data that way, you're able to see more because there's so many fucking people who are into that shit and looking into it and trying to get into it, like we saw with 4chan trying to hack into ballots and successfully doing it. Well, people on 4chan. I don't want to sound like a boomer on Fox. 4chan's at it again. Who is this guy? But yeah, like we're seeing this stuff, and they're following the data streams being beamed to other countries and whatnot. And so the takeaway is that it's always been fucky. There's always been fuckery. And now it's either they're too dumb to hide it, which I don't buy, or they just don't give a fuck anymore. They're like, this is too much of a problem to hide, so just do it, and it's not going to be a problem anyways, because what are people going to do? And if that's the bet, if that's where they place their bets, They're right, because nobody's done anything. The storming the Capitol was a joke. There may be things at work between intelligence agencies that we're not seeing, and who knows what the hell is going on there. But that it's like with the censorship and whatnot that we're talking about, and for years anarchists have been warning people about places like China and how we're adopting their censorship techniques and their facial recognition tracking and social credit scores and all that stuff. It's happening. If there's all this news around the world about the election fraud, what's been happening in DC, all that stuff, and we're not seeing it, but everyone else is, they're closing us off from everything else. They're isolating us in this country.
Yeah, and it's kind of a side point, but imagine how weak we look to the rest of the world.
Mm-hmm.
It's concerning to me, because if I see it as, if there's ever a time that we would be attacked catastrophically, it's going to be a time like this.
Mm-hmm.
It's going to be a time where everyone is so scatterbrained and everything is so corrupt and out of control that what is anybody going to be able to stop? So again, kind of a side point, but that lingers in my mind about just how ridiculous and weak we look as a people, not a government or a country as a whole, let's say, but as a people. Because what the fuck are we going to be able to stop? A lot of people have speculated that one of the biggest reasons that we will never get invaded is because of how many citizens are armed. But none of that matters if they just bomb the fuck out of us.
Right. Because
they know that the government is so scatterbrained. We as a people are so scatterbrained, and there's disconnects between all the different agencies, which are corrupt individually and corrupt on a whole, and they don't get along anymore. It's really a problem.
Sure.
In terms of internationally as well. It's not condensed just to here.
Right. Well, and you're seeing things like Pelosi and Schumer talking to the high-up military to try to convince them to not let Trump have any ability to start a new war or nuke anybody, since he has the access codes, and also another round of trying to impeachment, and Pence invoking the 25th Amendment, I believe, all this stuff to try to get him out before, inauguration day for Biden and whatnot. So yeah, there's discourse there having to do directly with national security and possibly going into another war and all that stuff. So yeah, it looks weak. It looks scattered. You're absolutely right. The thing, yeah, I think it's good to talk about this because we mentioned it earlier. We are affected by this no matter if we choose to be separate from the system or not. And it doesn't really matter who's in there or not, whether we go left or right with the next president, with the House and the Senate and all the different branches and whatnot. It doesn't really matter, at least possibly up until this point, because it's been mixed. And so they're busy fucking with each other, too busy going back and forth on different issues to solidify, themselves as a whole and make terrible things happen, authoritarian things happen against the people. And now, if it does get solidified with a Democrat in the executive office, Democrats in controlling Congress and the Senate, then it'll be a more unified, I guess, left, for lack of a better term, than it has been before. And I was listening to Dave Smith's podcast, and he made that point and brought it up. And that's generally what causes more civil unrest, civil incidents, overthrows, coups, civil war, all that stuff, is when one wing has way more power than the other, and they're able to just enforce whatever they want without any back and forth, and the people are sick of getting stepped on by it.
Yeah, absolutely, which leads to things like the Capitol, which you mentioned right before I went off on my tangent about other countries and stuff. But one of the contrasts is, again, it's been about a year since we talked, and the last talk revolved around the rally in Richmond in January of 2020. And a big conversation after that was, what did it accomplish? Mm-hmm. That was one of the big things. And essentially the answer was pretty much nothing, because one of the things that prompted that was the bill that we talked about at the beginning with the red flag laws, mm-hmm. and one handgun a month, stuff like that. It still passed, mm-hmm. like a month later. So the contrast from that to a year later and what happened at the Capitol in DC, yeah, I think the disconnect some people are having with it is that more stuff happened in DC, but it's almost like more stuff happened, and yet the same outcome, if not worse, is going to be the case. It didn't accomplish whatever they were trying to accomplish. Who the fuck knows? And it's just going to make worse for people. Like you said, even us, even if we choose to try and be outside of it as much as we can't separate ourselves completely. So, you look at what happened in DC, and you say, okay, that guy who, with the cool picture of him with his feet up on Pelosi's desk, well, that guy just got charged with 3 felonies. Mm-hmm. They slapped him with 3 felonies at once. It's like, that guy's disappearing. Mm-hmm. He's gone from society now. Was it worth it to him? Do you think he thinks that he accomplished whatever him and his group wanted to? I doubt it.
Yeah. Yeah, and see, I don't think it was like all these people or paid actors go in there and do that. I think there are a bunch of idiots that got corralled in there and wanted to go in there, and now they're being used for this. Like, whenever people bring up conspiracies about this, that's why the whole thing, like, oh, it was Antifa and it was planned thing. I don't think any of the people that were going in there to do that were planning anything. They were going in and fucking around. They were being used by the state, who was planning to do things, as we saw with that 20,000-page domestic terrorism bill coming through. So, yeah, the outcome this time is worse than the outcome, say, after the Virginia rally, because the stuff that was already on the table for the Virginia rally already went through. That we didn't know that they had this bill ready, because, of course, they had 20,000 pages of a domestic terrorism bill ready before 24 hours after that happened. Of course they did. So they were just setting it up, nice slow pitch to knock it out of the park, and they did.
Yeah, exactly like we said earlier. It's their spearhead. Mm-hmm. That they need something. They can do it if they want. Realistically, they can do whatever they want whenever they want, but it's so much easier if they have a spearhead,
right?
And that event is that. Yep. Because they can point directly to something and say, we have to do this because of stuff like this,
right?
Even though most of that 20,000 page bill is not even going to pertain to anything like that. Mm-hmm. It's not going to pertain to better security at the Capitol. It's not going to be anything like that.
Right.
And if it is, it's going to be 1 page. It's like, with the thing with paid actors and stuff like that, is it possible that a couple of them, sure. I mean, we know that provocateurs are a thing. We know that happens. It's documented. It's not like it's, a well-kept secret, let's say. But I think it's much more likely that it's what you said, and that it's really just dummies who didn't know what they wanted to do. But then you add on the whole thing about the videos of the cops waving people in, opening the gates, and not just waving them in, like enthusiastically running towards them, waving their arms, saying, "Come on, let's go, let's go." And it's like, I think that plays right into what you said, in that they were being used, not necessarily as in a way of like being paid to be there. They were already going to be there, and they did it gave the state exactly what they needed.
Yeah. Yeah, useful idiots exist on both sides of the left-right spectrum, not just for commies in the left, but absolutely for fascists in the right. Useful idiots, people being used by the people at the top of the hierarchy. It's the people who think they can use the system for their own gain, and they get used for the gain of the system. And there's a video that I've seen side by side with the cops waving people in now, of all the aides and politicians and everybody in their supposed bunker that they sheltered in. And there's music, like party music blasting and people dancing and stuff. And then it pans over to the TVs where they're watching. You can see the live coverage of everything happening outside and inside the Capitol. It's showing, I think that if they're showing the TV, they want to show this is what's happening right now. They weren't scared out of their minds, sheltered in place. They were in there like, yeah, we did it. This is exactly what we wanted. So let's fucking celebrate it. And I saw that today before we recorded. And so that's what really solidified it in my mind.
Well, and that's not to say what we said. That's not to say there's nothing outside of just the state getting their spearhead that was suspicious. There was a couple things. The amount of people that weren't armed is suspicious to me. The cops, as we already mentioned, and the you mentioned it earlier, like it's being called a riot, literally. That's how they're describing it. And if you look at all the pictures, there's like a little bit of destruction. I'm not saying nothing bad happened. There was people killed and stuff, but when you look at the pictures of the damage, it's like, that's not a fucking riot.
Right.
It was not good in the moment to the people that were potentially scared, but in the overall scheme of things, it's not like a bunch of people died and a bunch of businesses were burned down or anything like that. So it seems weird to me that stuff happened, but absolutely none of it was beneficial to the people there who went there with the intention of it being beneficial to them.
Sure.
I think it just seems odd to me that so many of them weren't armed. That's really odd to me.
That was just LARPing. Well, it's interesting because going back to predictions that we've talked about and I've talked about on the show here of what will happen should Biden win or should Trump win. One of the things we talked about is like, will the right do anything? Because speaking of riots, what did we see all fucking summer? If we saw fucking riots, tons, like whole city blocks getting burnt down, people getting shot, people getting brutalized by the cops. So yeah, compared to everything we saw over the rest of the year, that was not a fucking riot. It's just not the same. And the similarity between the two is that neither of them accomplished anything. None of the riots, the anti-cop riots accomplished anything, and nothing at the Capitol accomplished anything. It's just all more fuel for lockdowns and whatnot, like we talked about.
Yeah, I saw something. It was basically worded like the left has a good idea, but the wrong target, and the right has the right target, but the wrong idea. And that's not all encompassing in terms of the grand scheme of things, but it's pretty accurate on a very simplified basis, in that you know, it's great that the righties targeted the state capitol building,
Mm-hmm.
but the reason they did it is not
To
they
install
don't
their
understand.
leader.
Yeah, exactly. To that capitol, like,
Yeah.
man, it's, it doesn't make any sense. It doesn't make any sense.
Right. No, it doesn't at all. And so, all right, let's move kind of towards the whole, private business, so they can do whatever they want and kick Trump and everybody else off if they want to thing. That, first of all, is just one more thing that the powers that be want us to be arguing about, want us to be going back and forth about, instead of looking at the real issue of whether or not we have access to the important information that comes out every day, whether that be what Trump is doing. Because can you imagine if he's doing something fucking crazy and we don't get to hear anything about it? Because that dude will post anything he's doing on Twitter, and now we don't get to know that. So that's one
Yep.
thing that's not great about that. Second of all of these companies are not fucking private businesses, and I'm going to get probably flamed for saying that, but it's not the same as a mom and pop shop down somewhere else. Luckily, I can post an article, a fantastic, really long, really in-depth article that a friend of the show, Jeremy Harding, wrote, describing exactly why Facebook is not a private business, and it applies to these other giant social media corporations as well. It's way too long to go into completely, but the other corporations that propped them up and got them going were already intelligence gathering corporations paid by the U.S. government to do what they do, as well as all of their interests being protected by law, whether it's IP law or anything else, to stop anyone from having competition with Facebook, Twitter, what have you. It's all protected by the state. It's not a private business if it's completely protected, funded, backed, you name it, by the state. It's a stupid fucking argument. And you can also turn it around on the people
By us.
What's that?
By us.
Yeah.
It's money from us that goes into that stuff.
Right. Money from us and money printer go burr as well. It's all nonsense money either way. But yeah, they're using it, whether it's from us or not, to do this stuff to us. Crap, what was the other thing I was going on? Okay, so you see people who were screeching at the idea of it's a private business, they can do whatever they want before, now trying to turn that back around on people saying they shouldn't do this and saying, well, you said it's a private business, right? They can do whatever they want. And I think the best response I've seen to that is, okay, so let all the private businesses that want to open up that have been shut down by the government for lockdowns open back up. And they sure don't like that.
Oh no, they hate it. I saw that same thing, and it's exactly how you should respond to that, because and first of all, I really want to emphasize that comparing Facebook or Twitter or any other corporation or mega corporation to the local business down the street it's so intellectually lazy that it's not even worth listening to or talking to someone who's going to present that to you. Mm-hmm. It's so lazy. Even if we couldn't literally point out the funding that goes from the state to these corporations, to compare a private business down the road from me to a corporation like Facebook or Twitter or Google or anyone else, the comparison is not good either way. But right. It's even worse when you know how they're funded and how they're protected and how they're all connected. How you said, like how they were propped up when they first came into existence. The comparison is just so lazy.
It is.
So, yeah.
Yeah, it's lazy. It doesn't make any sense. And that's something that people latch onto during this argument. It's like, well, there's tons of other businesses that get subsidies too. It's not just subsidies. someone compared it to farming, because farming is heavily subsidized by the government, right? Like, so now should the government be able to tell them what to do with their crops and whatnot? And it's like, well, first of all, they can and they do tell them what to do with their crops and whatnot because they're subsidized. Yep. And second of all, they're not involved in anything other than this subsidizing. They're not, like Facebook, directly propped up by CIA connections. And also, I'll throw that article that Jeremy Harding wrote in the description of this if anybody wants to fact check and read it. And I can promise you it's all there. Very well researched, so check that out. But it's not remotely the same. And I think I said it before, but it's also a distraction. It's also a distraction argument. It's not the fucking problem. We shouldn't be arguing whether or not it's a private business, whether or not they can do that, this, whatever. It's all corporations, which are fictional entities that were created by a government system. Corporations are nonsense. They're absolutely fictitious persons that are given rights in the legal system to begin with. And our problem is the crossover between corporations and government to begin with. Just look at who Biden's already planning to install as members of different levels of government, his cabinet, whatever. I can't remember if it's EPA, FDA, which one it was, but the person he wants to install to run that agency is a former Monsanto exec again, and that swap happens constantly back and forth from EPA and FDA to Monsanto and back and forth. You can look back in all the public records and see that. And there was another one that I saw too. I think it was from what is that weapons big weapons companies, not Halliburton, I don't know, one of those big ones is going into Raytheon, maybe one of those is being selected for a position in government. And it's like, come on. It's just more shit thrown in our face. It's not, it's just collusion is all it is.
Yeah, and it's just, to pretend like we are going to just not care about the control that these entities have over us, because even if it was really a private business, it's like, okay, why do they have that kind of control over us though? That's what we need to be talking about. That's what we need to get a hold of. It's not what we don't need to get a hold of is whether it's a private business or not. We can do that when businesses can actually be private, because that's not what's happening in this current environment. We can have that conversation. It just doesn't matter right now. What matters is they do have this kind of control over us. They can do this to whoever they want, and they will. They do it every day. They silence people every day. And like you pointed out at the beginning of this particular conversation, we need to know at least an idea. We're going to be lied to a lot of the time. We need to have an inkling of an idea of what's taking place. And if we don't, that's a problem for us. It's a bigger problem than it already is. We already know we're going to be lied to. We already know that there's stuff that's not going to be told to us at all. But the little stuff that is put out there, we at least need to know that.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And like you said, these companies can do and will do these things, and it's because they're able to, because they are backed by government to be able to do this. They're protected from having any competition for other people to leave them voluntarily and go to something else. There are some other platforms that are managing to do okay and hopefully grow, like Float and MeWe and Minds and whatnot. But at a certain point, when they get big enough, they're going to get bought out or sued or whatever by Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, just like every other fucking platform that's come up since then. And it's all legal through these government regulations that protect these entities. And yeah, it's not the thing. The important part. Let's try to bring it back to what's important here, and that is, like it always has been, and it's adapting to what's going on around us so that we can survive whatever shitstorm is coming. We know whether Biden gets in or Trump somehow hangs on, that there's going to be attacks on gun rights. There's going to be continued attacks on speech issues. There's going to be more money printed. The national debt's going to increase. Hyperinflation's always going to be a problem. It's just seeing this stuff coming, which helps. But we can always know that it's going to be there.
Yeah, absolutely. It's, we talk about this a lot. We talk about what's coming. We talk about, we expect this, or, whatever. We say it all the time. A lot of people in our sphere say it all the time. And first of all, the problem is we all have a pretty good idea of how it's going to happen. It's not a great idea on when it's going to happen, because some of these events are random purposefully. Mm-hmm. You can say, oh, maybe something's going to happen on the 6th. A lot of people thought maybe something would happen, but you don't really know until it happens, and shit goes downhill fast. So the important thing, especially right now, is if you go against the grain, they're probably going to ban you. Mm-hmm. It's almost certain. So find another way to connect to people, and make sure they're good people, mm-hmm. first of all, that have your best interest in mind, and just be prepared for that disconnect from the majority of society, because that is going to be one of the first things that they're going to do. Like, I suspect what they're going to start implementing before they red flag people and actually go to their home is that they're going to completely disconnect them from social media, mm-hmm. first. I don't know, a week in advance, a month in advance. I think those events are specifically going to correlate, mm-hmm. because that way no one can get anything out when it happens. After it happens, during it, before it, I got this thing in the mail, or I've been served, or coming whenever. I think we're going to start seeing that. So that kind of stuff is why you have to find another way now to connect to other people.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Have your backup channels ready for sure. So it's going to be shitty no matter what happens, but let's kind of look at the scenarios of what could happen, right? So Trump goes away. He's fucked. All this stuff works out in the way that either it's supposed to, if there really isn't any voter fraud, or that they wanted it to, if there is, and so on and so forth. Biden gets in, and the Democrats have control of the executive branch in the House and the Senate, right? It's like what I mentioned before that Dave Smith was talking about on his podcast. Now we have a united one side of the two parties, one party pretty much making all the decisions and able to push them through because they have the majorities. So we're going to see a lot of crackdowns on a whole lot of different things. So it's time to be prepared for that. And I know it's hard to prepare with guns right now because there's no fucking ammo or anything like that. It's hard to go out and shoot because you can't buy any more ammo. But that's one scenario. The other scenario is if somehow, it's this insane occurrence that voter fraud gets proved and Trump stays in somehow, or if he starts another war so that they can't swap presidents out and he has to stay in, who knows what. That either way, it's breaking the other party. If the Democrats win this time and push all of this through with the damage that was caused through media because of the Capitol storming and whatnot, the right is broken. It's fractured between Trump supporters, old style Republicans, who knows what else. They're already feeling pretty down and pretty broken from what I've seen of just them talking. If Trump somehow makes this happen and proves that Democrats cheated, did all this stuff, whatever, that's going to destroy the Democratic Party. So either way, no matter what scenario we're looking at full control by one or the other, in my opinion. That's what it looks like to me.
Yep.
And that's scary.
Yeah, it is scary. I think a lot of people kind of boil it down, and sometimes this is kind of accurate, but a lot of people will boil it down to, oh, it doesn't matter who's in there. The kind of the two wings of the same bird, I guess, is how a lot of people say it. And like I said, I think sometimes that's accurate. But if you completely break one, first of all, I don't know if we'll ever, before necessarily like a full collapse were to happen, I don't know that we'd ever see another right-wing person elected as president.
Mm-hmm.
If the Democrats take this, which looks like what's going to happen. I don't know if it'll ever happen again. The way that Donald Trump was able to stir up boomers and right-wing people, I don't know that anyone will ever be able to do that again.
Right.
To actually get them to go out and do the whole bullshit process. So while I agree that it's pretty much the same no matter who's in there, what I disagree with is how dangerous their followers are. And this opinion is not popular sometimes, but I am not bothered by a bunch of boomers who are, they're mostly FUDs, they're mostly LARPing. I'm not bothered by them in the sense that what they want to implement, it's not good, but it's not much worse than what we've already got, is how I like to say it. They pretty much, some small changes happen incrementally, but it's not much worse than what's already here. Not good still. The followers, who are basically admittedly communists now, what they want to implement, and if they have complete control, that emboldens them and makes them more frightening, in my opinion, than they already were. There's, like I said, I know that opinion's not popular with some people, but who's in the building of the government? Mostly, you're pretty much going to get the same thing. I don't think you're going to get the same thing from their followers, though. I think one is worse than the other, and I think we can identify who that is.
It could be, and I think it's definitely, you feel that way. I don't really know how to describe it, but the political alignment tests or whatever. If you're a more conservative person, I'm not talking politically, but you do a lot of the same things that the people on the right do, like shooting guns and whatnot. And you enjoy having the standard family unit and everything like that. Of course, that's not going to be as threatening. So I think people on either side can look at it and see either side as threatening. But my thing is, I don't think that's even like a possibility anymore, because that's the idea, right? The right side, the right wing, Republican, whatever being in there, is a slower side towards authoritarianism, a slower slide, towards authoritarianism, because they're about conserving the way things are and not moving forward with progression. And the Democrats, the left, is about pushing forward for progress. So that's a faster slide into authoritarianism, as a lot of people look at it. With how the parties are being fractured and absolutely smashed, depending on what happens between now and the election, I don't know that we have even that to fall back on anymore. I don't think that's a possibility, no matter who wins, that it will be a slower slide one way or the other. I think we're ramping up insanely fast through the last 4 years, especially the end right now, and there won't be a possibility, if the right gets in, for that maybe slower, more controlled slide anymore, because it's going to be a fucking right hook coming towards the left, because it's going to completely destroy the left.
Yeah, you know what? That's actually a really good point. You're probably right about that, because, that's a good point. It's going to be so broken regardless that it's basically, like you said, just a right hook with, and there's no gloves up, there's no guard, there's no nothing to stop it, and that's going to be the case either way.
Yeah.
What I don't think is the same in terms of, I think you're right in terms of who's in there. There's not going to be a slow progression regardless anymore. I think it's the dangers of the followers that bother me.
Sure.
Granted, someone like Donald Trump, who, if whatever miracle happens in his eyes and he takes it, it's very possible that the people we're talking about, conservatives, who generally, they're kind of, they have some really bad, shitty ideas. But like you mentioned, they're kind of, I just want to shoot. I just want to fucking hang out with my family. I don't want to be bothered very much. It's very possible that as bitter as Donald Trump is, he could embolden them the same way that I'm talking about the left.
Sure.
So that if that happened, it's certainly possible that they would both essentially be equal at that point.
Right. Well, and you see the extremism that has come out in favor of Trump throughout the last 4 years too. I think that Proud Boys, Patriot Prayer, whatnot are just as big of a joke as Antifa on the surface. Except you also see the same shitty shit. Like I see most of the communist imagery as death symbols, just like it is like with all the people that's killed. Same as I would see Nazi imagery and whatnot. And you see Proud Boys, Patriot Prayer people wearing shirts that say right-wing death squad. And yeah, it's hilarious to own the libs, own the left or whatever, but I'm not interested in right-wing death squads. I'm not interested in that being an idea that's okay. I don't want left-wing death squads. I don't want right-wing death squads. And to take it further, if Trump somehow reels this back, and like I said, it's that fucking right hook coming for the left, it's also going to be cracking down on the people who abandoned him in the last month or so, and the people who started drifting away when it looked like a Biden victory. It's going to be coming down on Pence. It's going to be coming down on the governor of Georgia, who they had that phone call with that the transcript came out. He's pretty much begging him to look for more votes and stuff. It's not just going to be the right punching back at the left. It's going to be Trump and his supporters going after everybody who wronged him, which is not only going to destroy the left wing and the Democrats, but it's going to fracture the right and the Republicans further, and who knows what the fuck that's going to end up looking like.
Yeah, because that's almost a different that thing would almost not even be that entity you described. It almost wouldn't even be a right wing anymore. It'd pretty much just be its own.
Yeah, who knows what
its
the
own
fuck
thing. It would be so emboldened. Yeah, because we really boil it down too easily, I think, now to right and left.
Mm-hmm.
That's probably fair to say. The thing is, everyone thinks of like the political graph or whatever, and I guess you could use that as an idea. But it's like, the left wing supporters, at the very least, and a lot of the politicians themselves are not the fucking same as 20, 30, 40 years ago.
Sure.
And I think they deteriorated into whatever the hell they are now. But that would absolutely be the case with the Trump supporters, because you're right. He's so bitter. I know it. Mm-hmm. I know he is. And if somehow he pulled this off, he's going to want to smash, especially people like Pence, who abandoned him. Basically, he's going to see it as, you abandoned me in the last hour.
Mm-hmm. Well, look at all the people who have walked away from him. Like, they weren't exactly stable to begin with, or that he fired, like John Bolton and Chris Christie, all these fucking people. And look at the people who are still in his corner now. What's that psycho's name? Fucking Lynn Wood. That dude is a fucking nut job. Like, and not in everything necessarily. I don't know. I can't validate any of the claims he's putting out. I'm seeing that he's been tweeting that he has proof that politicians, and he has supposed names of politicians, are approached by someone with a kid and a gun and forced to rape and kill the child to be inducted into whatever the fuck's going on. This dude's tweeting that stuff out. And if we've ever followed the whole Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell stuff and whatnot, any of that stuff for a long time, we know that's possible, right? So either this guy's trying to capitalize on that and make it a rallying point or something, or he's fucking lying about it and trying to capitalize on it, and it's fucking crazy. But my point is, these are the type of people who still have his back no matter what. Or you have Poopy Pants herself and everybody else over at Liberty Hangout, which have, for some reason, still call themselves libertarians, even though they're 100% backing Trump and disavowing Republicans. It's like, I don't even know what's happening here, but my point is the people still in his corner are unhinged. Those are not the people I want to see on top.
Oh yeah, you're definitely right. You're absolutely right. It would certainly be exponentially different than the last 4 years. which is probably going to happen either way. But I think people would probably be surprised with how much force would be behind you use, a hook, how much force would be behind that. And, people, when you condense your following down into the most extreme of all of the followers you did have and the other ones left, you're left with something that's quite frightening, really.
Yeah. Yeah. Imagine if there is proof of all the collusion and voter fraud and stuff, and he actually goes after everyone involved. That would include the people who didn't back him, the people that didn't look into it from his right-wing side. So he's not only going to, if that's proof, that's huge, right? People have to go to jail, possibly charges of treason and whatnot happening. Yeah. So that's a ton of people from the Democratic Party, and that's also now, because they've backed off and abandoned him, a ton of people from the Republican Party. What happens when all these people are removed? Is he going to handpick them? Is there going to be another round of votes to put new senators and congressmen and governors and stuff in? This is fucking wild. And it's still comparable to if everything goes through for the Democrats like they want it to now, and just putting Biden and Kamala Harris in there. It's going to be the smashing of the Republican Party and full control by them. So it's not good is what I keep coming back to.
It's not good.
And just, like you said, keep connected with everybody and prepare for whatever the fuck happens. And quit arguing with each other.
Do that. At least about the stupid shit. If it's going to be, I'll get into these little meme things where I'll post it where it's kind of an argument, but it's like, I'm not looking to argue with you. I'm joking about it, and people want to argue anyway. And it's like, dude, if you want to argue with me, please, for fuck's sake, make it something that's worthwhile. Make it like the conversation you and I just had, where you actually changed my mind about and made me realize, okay, the same thing that I think about the left, if Trump somehow, the supporters of the left at least, if Trump pulled this off, that thing is going to happen instantaneously.
Right.
And it's like, have conversations like that, please. No private, Facebook is not a private company, but if your friend isn't going to realize that, they're not going to realize it. Right. So instead say to them, it's bad that this can happen either way. It doesn't need to be about whether it's private or not. It's pretty easy to say, hey, if this can happen to them, it can and will happen to you as well. Right.
And they're able to do it because government. It always comes back to that, following the money. We all have bigger things on our plates. Our communities are being decimated economically. There's more poor people, people pushed into poverty than there ever has been before, homeless, all this stuff. And nobody in government gives a shit about you or is going to help you with that. And it's like I've been saying on this show, and you've been saying with me, and we've all been saying on social media forever, we got to keep doing what we're doing and building communities and helping each other out and stuff, rather than argue about whether Facebook is a private company, because that's not helping your neighbor whose business closed. That's not helping you if you're facing eviction because you haven't been able to go to work over shutdowns for the last however many months. It's not helping anything directly. Speaking at the listeners now. So yeah, help each other. Get on the same page and don't argue about nonsense, please. And come talk with me. I'll be happy to argue about memes with you. But that's as far as I'll take it. Fucking amen.
Fantastic. Well, that's it's one of the best ways to put that, really, is just make it worthwhile. Just make it worthwhile. That's it. It's really as simple as that.
Yeah. Take care of each other. And that puts us at an hour, my man. That was an intense conversation. Hopefully everybody was able to slog through that with us, because we kind of jumped around, but I think we hit the bullet points.
I think we did. Yeah, it was a good one.
Sweet. Awesome. Well, thanks for coming on, man. Thanks everybody for listening. You know where to find the show, at Beyond Ballot Pod, everywhere on these horrible giant media company sites, but also on the good ones. You can find at non-voting Nick literally everywhere unless Parler's gone, in which case I'm not on Parler, but I am on Float and MeWe and all that stuff too, and of course still on Patreon. So thanks, Andrew Cosgrove, for joining me, and we'll see y'all next time.
Professional anarchist.
You guys are getting paid?